How could the world fall into a war where no one officially fought, yet everyone lived as if tomorrow might never come? I remember the silence more than the speeches, the strange, heavy silence that followed the end of the Second World War. Cities lay in ruins, graves were still fresh, and yet flags were raised, treaties signed, and smiles carefully rehearsed. We told ourselves the nightmare was over. But history, I learned, does not always end with explosions. Sometimes it begins again, with whispers. In 1945, I was a lecturer in political philosophy, recently returned from Europe. I had walked through streets where entire generations had vanished. Libraries burned, universities collapsed. Civilizations, it seemed, had cracked under their own weight. And yet, optimism ruled the air. The United States and the Soviet Union, former enemies turned unlikely allies, stood victorious over fascism. At conferences, we spoke of cooperation, collective security, and a new moral order. The founding of the United Nations felt like a promise written into history itself. Many of us believed reason had finally prevailed, that science, institutions, and shared trauma would bind nations together. We were wrong, not because hope was foolish, but because memory is short and power never sleeps. The tension did not arrive suddenly. It crept in through footnotes, closed-door meetings, and careful language. In Washington, the future meant democracy, open markets, and ideological choice. In Moscow, the future meant security, absolute, uncompromising security, born from centuries of invasion and betrayal. Both sides carried scars. Both believed they were acting defensively. I studied reports from Eastern Europe and sensed the shift. Governments were being reshaped, opposition silenced, elections staged. Liberation, the Soviets insisted. Domination, the Americans whispered. Meanwhile, American economic plans promised reconstruction, but also influence. Aid was never neutral, neither was ideology. The world, we realized, was not big enough for two universal truths. The year 1947 marked the turning point. I listened to the announcement of what history would call the Truman Doctrine and felt a chill. The language was calm, moral even, but it divided the planet into camps of loyalty and suspicion. Soon followed the Marshall Plan, rebuilding Western Europe with astonishing speed. To American policymakers, it was salvation.
Agreed.
To the Soviet leadership, it was encirclement disguised as charity. Borders hardened, alliances formed, and words like containment, buffer states, and spheres of influence entered everyday vocabulary. What troubled me most was the logic behind it all. Every action justified itself by imagining the worst intentions of the other. Fear was no longer an emotion. It had become policy. Then came the bomb. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. I was reading scientific analyses when I understood the truth that few dared to say aloud. War had become unwinnable. Civilization had invented its own extinction. When the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic weapon in 1949, the final illusion collapsed. Power was now symmetrical, destruction mutual. Peace fragile beyond comprehension. We called it deterrence. I called it a pact with terror. Never before had humanity lived under a peace that required perfect fear, eternal vigilance, and absolute rationality. Three things history had never sustained for long. The Cold War was no longer a concept. It was a condition of existence. The Cold War was never officially declared. No single document announced its birth. It emerged from trauma, mistrust, and the certainty that compromise was weakness. Neither side believed itself evil. Both believed themselves necessary. And that, I learned, is how the most dangerous conflicts are born. As a scholar of that era, my final lesson was painfully clear. Wars do not always begin with hatred. They begin with certainty. Certainty that we are right. Certainty that they are dangerous. Certainty that fear is safer than understanding. The guns fell silent in 1945, but the war for the future of humanity had only just begun. And we, intellectuals, diplomats, scientists, stood between worlds, knowing that history would one day ask not who won, but why we allowed fear to become our most powerful ideology.